Many people don't realize they're lacking God's perspective because their vision is blurry. Jesus says, take the log out of your own eye before trying to take the speck out of your brother's eye. And this is all about having distorted vision, but it's much deeper. And I used to just skip this section because it made no sense until I made this one specific connection. See, the next thing Jesus says is don't give holy things to dogs or pigs. And that right there is the key. So why does Jesus point to dogs and pigs when he's dealing with condemning judgment? In this video, we're going to walk through this passage and make 6 key observations that often get overlooked. And by the end, we'll have our answer and some deeper understanding. Why does Jesus refer to pigs and dogs? Here's the basic answer for those of you that don't want to stick around. He's making a point about unreceptive, unbelieving people that act like animals, like Cain did in Genesis chapter 4 when he killed Abel. So the question becomes why? And what does this mean? And how does this fit within the framework of judgment and condemnation? And to answer that, we have to recognize 6 things about not condemning others. Starting in verse 1, Jesus says, judge not. And usually people stop here and they don't actually read the rest of the scriptures. God says to judge properly with right motives, with a right evaluation, not according to appearance or from a human standpoint, right? But judge according to right things. I think in John chapter, I forget what chapter it is, but Jesus says in John, judge rightly. Judge not that you be not judged. And he's about to explain what kind of judgment he's exactly referring to. With the judgment you pronounce, okay, so we're making a judgment call about something. You will be judged with that same measure of judgment, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So there's a measurement that people are using to make a judgment call about something. That's what Jesus is addressing here. The very measure that you're using as a standard for something will actually be measured back to you. So there's a few things for us to understand. Back in Matthew chapter 6, verse 14 and 15, we saw that we ought to forgive others. And I think at the end of that, in fact, I'll pull it up real quick. Jesus says, if you forgive others, this is in chapter 6, verse 14, if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. It almost sounds like the measurement that you're using and giving out to people is the measurement that God will use towards you, whatever that means. But if you don't forgive others their trespasses, it goes on to say your heavenly Father won't forgive you. So we at least have that to reference back to, right? At least here when it talks about the measurement, it's in reference to God giving the measure of forgiveness that you show others. So this is a similar idea that we see here in the context of judgment. It's likely that the judgment here being described by Jesus is at least connected to, or even the same idea as the forgiveness we just saw in Matthew 6. So we're going to see that you can live according to man's standard, which is self-righteousness, as we see with the scribes and Pharisees back in chapter 5, verse 20, or you can live by God's standard, which Jesus clarifies in chapter 5, verse 48, is perfection. And so number 1, here's the first observation that we cannot afford to miss. The measurement that we use for our own standard of righteousness matters. That's what's being referenced here. What is the standard of righteousness that you use? We also have to use that same measurement towards others and not have double standards, because often we can make ourselves the standard as if we are the pinnacle of perfection and righteousness. And I think Jesus is slowly stripping that away from people. You're not as righteous as you think, buddy. So this is not about being better than others. It's about being right with God. Those are 2 very different standards, right? This is about being acceptable in God's sight, which is perfection according to verse 48. So if God can show grace, as we saw, he lets his rain and sunshine come upon the evil and the good. If God can show grace in his judgment of us and delay the penalty for our sin and show us mercy, then we can also do the same towards others, even in the midst of their own flaws and offenses, okay? So we're starting to get an understanding, just looking at the Sermon on the Mount in context, what kind of judgment Jesus is saying, don't engage in that. It's a self-righteous, hypocritical, double-standard, prideful kind of judgment where you present yourself as the authority and the measurement by which everyone else has to measure up to. And we've already seen several measurements mentioned. In chapter 5, there's a measurement of righteousness with the scribes and Pharisees. In chapter 6, verse 27, there's a measurement of life God gives each person. There's a measurement of trouble in chapter 6, verse 34. And here's the fourth measurement we've seen in the Sermon on the Mount. It's a measurement of judgment, okay? So he'll go on to explain what he means about you using the measurement. It will be measured back to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, okay? But you don't notice the log that is in your own eye. Notice what's in the person's eye as they're making the condemning, self-righteous judgment. Their thing is bigger than the thing they're pointing out in others. So this becomes a question of motive and reasoning. He says, why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but you don't notice the log in your own eye, or you don't give attention to that? Why are you choosing to focus on or magnify what is small in another person's life? So here's the second observation. This reference to the eye brings us back to Matthew 5:29, chapter 5, verse 38, talking about tearing out the eye and making sure your eye is good in chapter 6, verse 22 and 23. We've seen references to that. Let your eye be good so that your body's full of light. So this is all about having a good eye towards people, towards God, towards ourselves, and towards life in general. This is about, hey, don't condemn others. That's the point. When you're aware of God's grace and mercy towards you and you've received his forgiveness, this should begin to shape how you think about the failures of others and the offenses of others towards you and their weaknesses and mistakes. So number 3, this is the third observation, is that our worldview should be shaped by God's mercy and grace towards us. It shouldn't be shaped by the offenses of others or by our own sense of morality and self-righteousness. Our perception of the world, our vision, shouldn't be with bad judgment towards others out of self-righteousness, but out of this reflection of God's love and forgiveness that he's shown us. So we see this idea of magnifying the speck in other people's eyes in Luke chapter 18, verse 11. You can go read that. It's a parable Jesus gives. He goes on, verse 4, or how can you say to your brother, which is another way of saying what he just said, okay? Why do you choose to see the speck, and why do you choose to say this? Brother, let me take the speck out of your eye. Now, it sounds like at first this person's trying to be helpful. I'm just trying to help someone through their problems and lift their burdens and be a solution to their problems. And, well, hold on. Look at Jesus and what he says. You who say, let me take the speck out of your eye when there is the log in your own eye. So, apparently, we're going to see that Jesus will address this same kind of misdiagnosis and misapplication in chapter 23, verse 15. He'll accuse the religious leaders of doing something similar. He'll say, you travel across the sea and the land to make disciples or converts that are twice as much a child of hell as you are because they're using the wrong standard. He'll talk about how they're oppressive and they burden people rather than lifting the burden, right? So there's a lot of things Jesus will correct about the religious system of his day and the religious elite. Not everything is wrong, but a lot of it is flawed, along with their judgment and the standard that they use. Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and you can find everything about this ministry on abovereproachministry.com. All of our Bible resources, our online church, ways to support this ministry, and so much more. And if you live anywhere near Spartanburg, South Carolina, come check out our church on Sundays at 10 a.m. Also, I have 2 brief updates for those of you that are part of this community. Number 1, the revision of my book Fruitful is coming out soon, hopefully in the next few weeks. So be sure to grab a copy of that when it does release. And number 2, we now have options on our website for monthly support. And when you become part of our monthly support team, you get access to all of our exclusive teachings and videos that get released every week. This is just my way of saying thank you. All right, that's all I got for you. Let's get back to the video. So he goes, how can you say to your brother, let me take that speck, when there's a log in your own eye? So we see this healthy eye versus the unhealthy eye. We saw that in chapter 6, verse 22 through 23. That's in reference to what treasures do you have? What are you pursuing, right? What is it that you love and value in life? What's your value system? And when he says there's the log in your own eye and you don't notice it, it also seems to be a kind of denial or a willful ignorance of someone's personal sin. Like, I'm not going to deal with my own sin problem. I'm going to address and magnify the sins of others, which I know it sounds like we're making some assumptive leaps by saying the log is a sin problem, but to be consistent with the Sermon on the Mount, this speck in the eye at least refers to something that proves to be a problem in the long run, right? And if someone is not dealing with their own sin problem before they begin addressing the sin of another, they're actually in danger of being a hypocrite in their evaluation of that person or in their attempt to help them. And this is consistent with what we saw Jesus talk about giving, praying, and fasting. Like, beware you don't copy the hypocrites. Galatians 6:1-3 warns against this blind eye towards our own weaknesses and failures in this prideful kind of way before coming under someone else's sin problem. Like, make sure you're aware of your own tendencies. Have an accurate and honest view of yourself. So here's the fourth thing. We'll see in Matthew chapter 23, verse 4, to kind of skip ahead, Jesus will say these self-righteous religious leaders, they tie up heavy burdens and they place these unrealistic, impossible expectations on people. While Jesus will say in chapter 11, hey, come to me. If you're heavy laden, I'll give you rest. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. So these self-righteous people are so busy addressing and magnifying the problems of others. They actually don't dedicate any time or energy to addressing their own sin problem. In other words, this becomes almost a way that prideful, self-righteous people, they cope with their own moral deficiencies, and they kind of excuse and justify their own sin problems by comparing themselves to weaker individuals and saying, you have a lot of sin in your life, let me help you, as if to be superior and on the moral high ground. So this becomes almost a way that people excuse their own sinfulness because you're standing above people and helping them and you're feeling superior to them. Jesus will say, so this is the kind of judgment Jesus is against when he says, judge not. He explains the kind of judgment. It's prideful, hypocritical, it's self-righteous, it's not rooted in truth, it's distorted. You're addressing something with a kind of corrupted vision. Verse 5, you hypocrite. So he makes it clear what he's referring to. First, take the log out of your own eye, then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So taking the speck out of your brother's eye is either synonymous with judgment or it's the result of judgment. Hey, I realized you have a problem. I'm making a judgment call, and I'd like to help take the speck out of your eye. Either way, these ideas are connected. To judge involves on some level this intent to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Jesus is not against that. He says, first, deal with that log in your eye. And again, Jesus is not against this kind of helpful judgment. He just wants things to be in order. Make sure you see clearly and you're not blinded by your own self-righteousness. So the kind of judgment God's against is a disordered one. We have to get things in their proper order, properly evaluate the speck in other people's eyes, which is to say I want to help people through their weakness, sin, moral failure, whatever, but I'm also aware of my own sinfulness and tendencies. Not to magnify either above the righteousness of Christ as a believer, but to say that I am aware of my tendencies to do bad things. So those who are blinded by worldly wisdom and the knowledge of man, they won't be able to truly help others who are in sin or be a part of the solution to their moral evil and sin problem. He says, don't, and now we get to verse 6, where after talking about how to judge rightly and how not to judge, he then gives another way of explaining what he just said. Do not give dogs what is holy. What did Jesus just say not to do? Don't try and deal with the speck in your brother's eye unless you first have taken the log out of your own eye. Okay? Don't give dogs what is holy. Example number 1 refers to a dog. And do not throw your pearls before pigs. Example number 2 involves pigs. Both are unclean animals in Jewish culture, lest they trample them underfoot and turn and attack you. That got pretty dark. So why this interesting kind of cryptic statement about, hey, don't throw valuable, sacred things to unclean animals? Seems like a given. I don't think anyone's really trying that. Well, what's interesting is that we're going to see this idea of throwing something holy and sacred to dogs later on in Matthew chapter 15 with the Syrophoenician woman, and she wants Jesus to heal her daughter. Her daughter has a demon, and she comes to Jesus, and Jesus says it's not right to take the children's bread and give it to dogs. The Syrophoenician woman, without skipping a beat, goes, yes, but still, like even the crumbs that fall from the master's table and the children's table, the dogs can still enjoy. So there's leftover for us pagans, is what she's saying. So with the pagan woman asking for the breadcrumbs from the children's table, it might be helpful for us to think about any parallels Jesus might be making between this section on the Sermon on the Mount and that story. But here's the fifth observation. This is about not spending your precious treasure, which we're going to see as godly wisdom and truth, not spending that on people who aren't open to it. Not everyone is open to your correction. Look, lest they trample them underfoot. They're clearly not for it. They're treating these pearls and sacred things as trash. In fact, they're hostile. And then when they're done dealing the finishing blow, they'll turn to you and go, "You're next, buddy." So this is about not spending your precious God-given treasure, wisdom and truth, on people who are not open to your correction. And they're not open to your constructive criticism. They didn't ask. Not everyone wants God's wisdom. So if someone is hostile, don't force it. Move on. And you go, how do we know this? In the next chapter, in chapter 8, we're going to see Jesus cast demons out of a man into pigs, unclean animals, and the people of that region are going to ask him to leave. They're going to reject him and his offer for life, and Jesus will leave rather than stick around. He'll actually commission that healed man to go and bring news of this miracle to the region. So Jesus will also tell his disciples in Matthew chapter 10, and here's what we do. When I think about what does this mean, one of the best ways we can begin to make sense of a passage is what is this immediate context, but also what is the rest of the literary context throughout Matthew's gospel? How does it fit into the macro narrative of Matthew's entire gospel story? And in Matthew 10, Jesus will tell his disciples as he sends them out with good news, he'll say, look, when you enter villages and cities, if someone's hostile towards you and the message you bring about God's kingdom, shake the dust off your shoes against them as judgment, and then move on to find a person who actually is peaceful and they're open to Jesus and his kingdom gospel. We'll also see passages in the Old Testament, which is really helpful to know. When you read the New Testament, think about anything in the Old Testament that might relate to or clarify what it is that you're reading. So in Proverbs 9, 7, and 8, in Proverbs 23, verse 9, these passages referring to wisdom principles, they actually speak of don't give wisdom to a fool who's strongly opposed to your wisdom and truth, or they might grow violent and actually injure you. In Matthew 13, we'll see Jesus referred to the pearls. And when he brings up these pearls, he'll say, hey, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls, and at last he finds this priceless treasure. And he's saying that's the wisdom in the kingdom of God. That's the valuable item that people find is the kingdom of God. And many people don't want the kingdom. They don't want the invitation into his kingdom, which comes through wisdom. They reject it in a very aggressive and violent way at times. So in the context of like trying to help your brother and take the speck out of your brother's eye, like be careful as you do that. Not everyone wants the wisdom you're offering and the truth of this kingdom. So the sixth and final observation is this. Essentially, when we read Matthew chapter 13, there's a lot to explain in those parables. But when we reference the pearl of great price, the merchant looking for something valuable, the pearl of great price and the ultimate treasure here that's being offered to people who can be represented by unclean animals, that ultimate treasure from heaven by the Father, it's the Son. Jesus is, and we've seen this throughout each session, like God is the reward of his people. God is our portion. He is the ultimate priceless treasure. He's the cornerstone the builders rejected. He's the priceless treasure. Once again, God is the true treasure of his people. But people reject him in their human knowledge and puffed up wisdom and pride. So all throughout the Sermon on the Mount, we're seeing this offer to come into God's kingdom, come in God's way through God's Son, which is the only God-ordained way in, but people continually make excuses, try and create their own way in their own sense of self-righteousness through their own spirituality or their own man-made religion. And they're trying to get in to the kingdom in a way that God has not authorized. There's one authorized way, and it's Jesus. People want to enter on their terms, so when you bring a contrary message to what they think and feel is good, they can grow hostile. And we see this throughout Acts and the Gospels. So either way, Jesus is the one who's truly being offered from heaven as the priceless treasure. And this is why in the next section, we're going to see Jesus talk about asking and seeking and knocking. And then he'll speak of the two gates, two paths and two eternal destinations. But before we get to that, we need to address something. And I want to make this very clear. In my previous videos about earthly treasure versus heavenly treasure and Solomon, I kind of messed up. It actually has to do with Solomon and the God-given wisdom he had. It's something a few of you in the comments actually kind of made me reconsider. So I hope to point out this truth that I overlooked. And this is why we study the scriptures together in community. So thank you guys for keeping me accountable in the comments. And in the next video, we're not going to continue in Matthew 7. We're going to revisit the previous passages, and it'll actually relate much better to what we addressed today in this session. So I'll see you there. Hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more biblical content just like this. We have hundreds of videos, but you might be most interested in these ones right here. Also, visit our website for all of our free resources and classes. And thank you so much for partnering with us financially to make this ministry even possible. Keep moving towards Jesus, and I'll see you in the next video.